Jake Morrison shifted in his seat and tried not to stare at his classmates. Even after 3 months at the Nexus Galactic Academy, he still felt like he was living in a science fiction movie. The classroom around him buzzed with quiet conversations, in dozens of different languages, some of which didn't even use sounds that human ears could properly hear. To his left sat HFY, whose body looked like it was made of living crystal. The light from the room's artificial sun passed through Zeph's transparent skin and created tiny rainbows on the desk. When Zeph spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He came from a world where silicon-based life forms grew like living gemstones in vast underground caverns. On Jake's right, Mira ran her webbed fingers through her blue-green hair. Her skin had a slight shimmer to it, like she was always slightly wet. She breathed through gills on her neck as well as her nose and mouth. Her homeworld was mostly ocean, with floating cities that moved with the tides. She had told Jake that she had never seen dry land until she came to the academy. Behind them, Corvin sat perfectly straight in his chair. He was nearly 7 feet tall, with gray skin covered in natural armor plates. His people, the Draknari, were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors and brilliant military strategists. Corvin wore the traditional blue and silver uniform of his planet's military academy. Even here, in a classroom focused on peace and diplomacy, he carried himself like a soldier ready for battle. Jake looked down at his own plain clothes and felt ordinary. He was just a 19-year-old kid from Denver, Colorado. His brown hair was messy because he kept running his hands through it when he was nervous. His blue jeans and sneakers seemed childish compared to the elegant robes and sophisticated uniforms worn by his alien classmates. The Nexus Galactic Academy sat on Harmony Prime, a massive space station that orbited between 3 different star systems. It was neutral territory, built specifically for education and diplomacy. Students came from all across the known galaxy to learn about other species and cultures. The goal was to create the next generation of ambassadors, scientists, and leaders who could work together to keep peace in the galaxy. Humans had only been part of galactic society for 5 years. When the first alien ships arrived at Earth, most people had expected war or invasion. Instead, the visitors had come with invitations to join something bigger than anyone had ever imagined. Earth was invited to send its best and brightest young people to learn alongside the children of 100 different worlds. Jake still couldn't believe he had been chosen. His grades were good but not amazing. He played soccer and worked part-time at a camping gear store. He liked hiking and fishing and had been an Eagle Scout, but none of that seemed special enough to earn him a spot among the galaxy's future leaders. The selection committee had told him that they wanted students who represented the diversity of human experience, not just the ones with perfect test scores. Professor Valdris entered the classroom, and all conversation stopped immediately. The Etherean moved with a grace that seemed to defy the station's artificial gravity. His body was tall and thin, covered in flowing robes that shifted color like oil on water. Dozens of tentacles moved around his head where a human would have hair, and his 6 eyes could look in different directions at the same time. He was old, even by Etherean standards, and was considered one of the most respected educators in the galaxy. "Good morning, young scholars," Professor Valdris said. His voice came from a translator device, since Ethereans communicated through chemical signals that most other species couldn't detect. "Today marks an important milestone in your education." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Important milestones at the academy usually meant tests, and tests meant the possibility of failure. He had already struggled with quantum mathematics and interstellar law. Advanced xenobiology was supposed to be easier, but Jake often felt lost when the discussion turned to the biological processes of species that didn't even have DNA. "As you know," the professor continued, "understanding different forms of life requires more than just memorizing facts. You must develop the ability to think like beings who evolved under completely different conditions. Today, you will face a practical examination that will test not just your knowledge but your adaptability." Mira's gills fluttered nervously. HFY's crystal body began to emit a low humming sound, which Jake had learned meant he was anxious. Even Corvin shifted slightly in his seat, though his expression remained perfectly calm. "You will each enter a survival simulation," Professor Valdris explained. You will have minimal equipment and must survive for 72 hours on an unknown world. The challenge is that you will not know what type of environment you are entering until you are already inside the simulation. Jake's heart began to beat faster. Survival situations were something he actually knew about. His father had taken him camping every summer since he was 5 years old. He knew how to build shelters, find water, identify edible plants, and start fires without matches. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he might actually have an advantage. The simulation will test your ability to adapt to unfamiliar conditions, the professor went on. Each environment has been carefully designed to challenge students from all backgrounds equally. Some of you may face worlds with different gravity, unusual atmospheric composition, or life forms that follow biological rules unlike those of your home planets. Around the classroom, students began to whisper nervously to each other. Jake caught fragments of conversation in languages he was still learning. Many of his classmates were discussing the survival training they had received on their home worlds. The Draknari learned wilderness survival as part of their basic military education. The crystal beings from Zeph 4's world had natural abilities that helped them navigate underground cave systems. Mira's people were expert swimmers who could survive in almost any aquatic environment. Jake realized that his human camping experience might not be as useful as he had initially thought. If the simulation put him on a world with crushing gravity, or an atmosphere he couldn't breathe, or temperatures that would kill him in minutes. His Eagle Scout training had prepared him for Earth's wilderness, but Earth was just one small planet in a galaxy full of worlds he couldn't even imagine. I can see that many of you are concerned, Professor Valdris said, his multiple eyes scanning the classroom. This is natural. The unknown always creates fear. However, remember that this test is designed to be challenging but fair. No student will be placed in a situation that is impossible for their species to handle. Jake wondered what that meant for humans. How much did the galactic community really know about human capabilities? Earth had only been in contact with alien civilizations for 5 years. Maybe the test designers didn't fully understand what environments humans could and couldn't survive in. He thought about some of the conversations he had overheard between other students. They often talked about Earth in ways that made him uncomfortable. He had heard words like death world and extreme environment used to describe his home planet. At first, he had thought they were joking or exaggerating. Earth seemed perfectly normal to him. It had weather and seasons, plants and animals, mountains and oceans. Sure, there were dangerous places like deserts and polar regions, but every world probably had areas that were hard to survive in. But the more he learned about other planets, the more he began to understand that Earth might actually be unusual. Most of his classmates came from worlds with very stable climates, consistent gravity, and simple ecosystems. Zeph 4's planet had no weather at all, just constant dim light from distant stars. Mira's world had gentle tides and temperatures that never changed more than a few degrees. Corvin's home had seasons, but they lasted for years at a time and changed very gradually. Earth had hurricanes and tornadoes, earthquakes and volcanoes, ice ages and heat waves. It had millions of different species of plants and animals, many of which were dangerous to humans. Jake was starting to realize that what he considered normal might actually be incredibly hostile by galactic standards. The examination will begin tomorrow morning, Professor Valdris announced. You will have this evening to prepare mentally, but remember that you cannot bring any equipment beyond what is provided in the simulation. Rest well, young scholars. Tomorrow you will discover what you are truly capable of. As the class ended, and students began to file out, Jake stayed in his seat for a moment longer. He watched his classmates discussing their concerns and strategies. Most of them seemed worried about facing conditions different from their home worlds. Jake realized that he might be the only student who would be comfortable with unpredictable, dangerous conditions. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake Morrison began to wonder if being human might actually be an advantage. Jake Morrison stood outside the simulation chamber and tried to calm his nerves. The hallway was filled with students from his class, all waiting their turn to enter the test. The chambers looked like large metal eggs, each one big enough to hold a single person. Cables and tubes connected them to massive computers that would create the virtual worlds inside. Mira stood near the wall, her blue skin looking paler than usual. Her gills were opening and closing rapidly, which Jake had learned meant she was very stressed. She kept touching a small pendant around her neck that contained water from her home ocean. HFY was making a high-pitched singing sound that his species used when they were worried. The crystal being's body was flickering between different colors, unable to settle on one. Other students from his world had explained that this happened when they couldn't control their emotions. Even Corvin looked tense. The tall warrior was standing perfectly straight as always, but Jake could see that his hands were clenched into fists. The Dreknari prided themselves on being ready for any challenge, but this test was different because they couldn't prepare for it in advance. "Jake Morrison," a voice called out. A technician with 4 arms and green skin gestured toward one of the open chambers. "You're next." Jake's heart started beating faster as he walked toward the simulation pod. The inside looked like a dentist's chair surrounded by screens and sensors. The technician helped him put on a thin suit that would monitor his body during the test. "The simulation will feel completely real," the technician explained. "Your body will remain here, but your mind will experience everything as if you were actually on another planet. If you are injured in the simulation, you will feel pain but suffer no real damage. If the situation becomes too dangerous, you can say the safe word terminus, and we will end the test immediately." Jake nodded and lay back in the chair. The technician placed a helmet over his head, and the world went dark. When light returned, Jake found himself standing in a forest. Tall trees stretched up toward a blue sky dotted with white clouds. The air smelled fresh and clean, with hints of pine and damp earth. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves above him, creating a soft rustling sound that reminded him of camping trips back home. He looked around and took inventory of his situation. He was wearing simple brown clothes and boots that fit well. A small pack sat on the ground next to him, containing basic supplies: a knife, some rope, a metal cup, and a piece of flint for starting fires. No food, no water, and no shelter. The forest around him looked remarkably familiar. The trees were similar to oak and pine, though not exactly the same as earth varieties. Ferns covered the forest floor, and he could hear the sound of running water somewhere nearby. The temperature felt comfortable, maybe around 70 degrees. Jake picked up his pack and started walking toward the sound of water. His father had always taught him that finding a water source was the first priority in any survival situation. As he walked, he automatically began noting details about his environment. The sun was shining through the trees from what seemed to be the south, based on the shadows. The ground was slightly damp but not muddy, suggesting recent rain. Small birds were singing in the trees, which meant the area was probably safe from large predators. He found a stream running clear and cold over smooth rocks. Jake knelt down and cupped some water in his hands, tasting it carefully. It seemed clean and fresh, with no strange flavors or smells. He drank deeply, then filled his metal cup and drank some more. With water secured, Jake began looking for a good place to set up camp. He found a spot near the stream, but slightly elevated, where the ground was dry and protected by large trees. Using his knife, he began cutting branches and gathering materials to build a shelter. The work felt natural and familiar. Jake had built dozens of shelters during his years in Boy Scouts and on camping trips with his family. He constructed a simple lean-to frame using fallen branches, then covered it with smaller branches and leaves to keep out rain and wind. The shelter wasn't fancy, but it would keep him dry and warm. As he worked, Jake found himself relaxing. This world felt surprisingly comfortable and welcoming. The gravity seemed normal, the air was easy to breathe, and the temperature was pleasant. He had been worried about facing some alien environment with strange conditions, but this place felt almost like home. While Jake was building his shelter, something very different was happening in the observation room above the simulation chambers. Professor Valdris stood with several other teachers in front of a wall of screens, each one showing the progress of a different student in their test. Most of the screens showed warning lights and alarm signals. HFY's body temperature was dropping rapidly as his crystal structure struggled with the high humidity of the forest environment. His breathing was becoming labored, and stress fractures were beginning to appear on his arms and chest. Mira was having even more serious problems. Her gills were swollen and inflamed from trying to process air with too much oxygen. Her species had evolved on a world with very thin atmosphere, and the rich air of the forest was actually poisonous to her. She was stumbling through the trees, gasping and confused. Corvin had managed to find water and start building a shelter, but his strong immune system was struggling against unfamiliar bacteria and microscopic life forms. His body was fighting an infection that would have been harmless to most species, but his people had evolved on a world with very simple microbiology. One by one, students were being pulled from their simulations as medical emergencies developed. The automatic systems were designed to protect the students, but it meant they were failing the test within hours of beginning. Dr. Kellen Hayes, the human liaison teacher, watched Jake's screen with growing amazement. While other students were struggling to survive, Jake was actually thriving. His body temperature, heart rate, and stress hormones were all within normal ranges. He showed no signs of environmental distress or adaptation problems. "This is impossible," whispered Professor Nix, an insectoid teacher whose species specialized in environmental adaptation. "The atmospheric composition of that simulation should be causing respiratory problems for any species. The humidity levels alone should be triggering emergency responses." Dr. Hayes frowned as she watched Jake calmly weaving grass into rope to improve his shelter. "What exactly are the environmental parameters of this simulation?" she asked. Professor Valdris manipulated controls on his station, bringing up detailed readouts. Gravity is 1.2 standard units. Atmospheric pressure is 1.1 standard, with oxygen concentration of 21%. Humidity varies between 40 and 80%. Temperature range from 15 to 25 degrees standard. The simulation includes 847 different species of plant life and 312 species of animal life, with complex interactions between all biological systems. "And the microbiology?" Dr. Hayes asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "Extremely complex," Professor Valdris replied. "The simulation includes bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites, representing typical levels found on Class M biospheres. Most species require significant immune system support to survive exposure for more than a few hours." Dr. Hayes stared at the environmental readings with growing understanding. "You said this simulation has been used for testing for many years. What's the average survival time for students?" "Most species manage between 6 and 8 hours before requiring medical evacuation," Professor Nix answered. The record holder, a Tarkonian explorer, lasted 14 hours before succumbing to atmospheric poisoning. On the screen, Jake had finished his shelter and was now walking along the stream, apparently looking for fish. He moved with confident, easy steps, showing no signs of distress or fatigue. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying himself. "Professor Valdris," Dr. Hayes said slowly, "what planet is this simulation based on?" The Etherean's tentacles writhed with what his species used to express embarrassment. "It is a composite environment, designed to represent typical conditions found on habitable worlds throughout the galaxy. However, the base template was taken from your species' homeworld databases." Dr. Hayes felt her blood run cold. "You're testing alien students on a recreation of Earth's biosphere? We thought it would provide an interesting challenge," and Professor Valdris explained. "Your planet's environmental data suggested it had more variety than most worlds, which would make for a comprehensive test of adaptability." On the screen, Jake had found a fallen log that blocked part of the stream, creating a small pool where fish were trapped. He was now carefully constructing a simple trap from sticks and stones, humming quietly to himself as he worked. Dr. Hayes realized that what the alien teachers considered an extreme survival challenge was just a pleasant camping trip for a human teenager. Jake wasn't struggling against impossible odds. He was in his natural element, doing things that millions of humans did every weekend for fun. The test that had been defeating galactic students for decades was simply too easy for the species it was originally designed to challenge. By the second day of the test, the observation room had become very crowded. Word had spread throughout the academy that something unusual was happening with the survival simulation. Teachers from different departments stood around the screens, watching Jake Morrison with fascination and disbelief. Most of the other students had been removed from their simulations within the first 12 hours. Zeph-4 had lasted only 6 hours before his crystal body began developing dangerous cracks from the humidity. Mira had been pulled out after 4 hours when her oxygen levels became critically high. Corvin had made it to 8 hours before microscopic organisms overwhelmed his immune system. Jake was now entering his 36th hour, and he showed no signs of stress or fatigue. In fact, he seemed to be getting more comfortable as time went on. Dr. Kellen Hayes stood next to Professor Valdris, both of them staring at Jake's vital signs displayed on the monitoring screen. His heart rate was steady and calm. His body temperature was perfectly normal. His stress hormone levels were actually lower than when he had started the test. "This should not be possible," Professor Valdris said for the 10th time that morning. His tentacles were twisted with anxiety, and his 6 eyes kept darting between different screens. "No species in our database can maintain stable biological functions in that environment for more than 15 hours. "How long has this test been used?" Dr. Hayes asked. 47 years, replied Professor Nix, the insectoid teacher. Her forearms were folded across her chest and her compound eyes reflected the light from the screens. "It was designed by the Galactic Education Council as the ultimate test of environmental adaptability. The longest any student has ever survived was 14 hours and 23 minutes. On the main screen, Jake was sitting by his campfire, cooking a fish he had caught that morning. He had improved his shelter by weaving grass mats and adding a rain cover made from large leaves. His small camp looked neat and organized, like something from a wilderness survival guide. "What exactly makes this environment so challenging?" Dr. Hayes asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer. Professor Valdris brought up a detailed analysis on his workstation. "The atmospheric composition includes oxygen levels that cause toxicity in most species. The humidity variations stress respiratory systems beyond their limits. The temperature fluctuations require constant biological adjustment. The microbial diversity creates an immune system challenge that most beings cannot handle for extended periods. The gravitational field is 1.2 times standard," Professor Nix added. "That level of constant stress causes muscle and bone fatigue in most species within hours. The variety of plant and animal life creates unpredictable chemical exposures that overwhelm normal biological filters." Dr. Hayes looked at the environmental readings again. Everything the alien teachers were describing as extreme and dangerous sounded perfectly normal to her. The oxygen level was exactly what humans breathed every day. The temperature range was like a pleasant spring day on Earth. The humidity was no worse than a summer afternoon in Florida. "Has anyone analyzed Earth's environmental data in comparison to other inhabited planets?" she asked. The room fell quiet. Professor Valdris's tentacles stopped moving, which Dr. Hayes had learned meant he was thinking very hard about something uncomfortable. "Dr. Hayes," he said slowly, "we may need to discuss something important about your planet's classification in our databases." Another teacher, a tall being covered in blue fur, stepped forward. Dr. Hayes recognized her as Professor Thek from the Planetary Sciences Department. "When Earth was first cataloged 5 years ago, our survey teams had some difficulty with the classification process." "What kind of difficulty?" Dr. Hayes asked, though she was starting to worry about the answer. "Professor, Thek manipulated a control panel, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a detailed breakdown of planetary classifications used by the galactic community. There were categories for different types of worlds: garden planets, with stable, pleasant conditions; standard planets, with normal variations in climate and biology; challenging planets with some difficult conditions; and at the bottom of the list, Deathworlds with conditions so extreme that most species could not survive there. Earth's initial classification was problematic," Professor Thek continued. "Your planet has atmospheric conditions that 847 out of 850 known species find toxic. The gravitational field is stronger than 93% of inhabited worlds. The temperature variations are more extreme than most species can tolerate. The biological diversity is so complex that it overwhelms standard immune systems. The holographic display zoomed in on Earth's data profile. Dr. Hayes felt her stomach drop as she read the technical specifications. Every measurement that seemed normal to her was highlighted in red, marked as extreme or hazardous by galactic standards. Your planet's weather systems include phenomena that we classify as natural disasters, Professor Thek went on. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, blizzards, floods, droughts. Most inhabited worlds have stable weather patterns, with only minor variations. On the screen, Jake had finished eating his fish and was now exploring the area around his camp. He walked confidently through dense undergrowth, automatically avoiding poisonous plants and unstable ground. To him, it was just a pleasant hike, through the woods. To the watching alien teachers, it looked like someone casually strolling through a deadly obstacle course. "So what classification did you give to Earth?" Dr. Hayes asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. Professor Valdris's voice was barely above a whisper. "Class X Deathworld, the most extreme classification in our system. We assumed that humans must have developed extraordinary technology to survive on such a hostile planet, or that our data was somehow incorrect." Dr. Hayes stared at the screen where Jake was now gathering berries that the galactic database marked as potentially lethal to most carbon-based life forms. He was eating them like candy, with no ill effects whatsoever. "You mean to tell me," she said slowly, "that you've been testing students for 47 years on a simulation of what you consider the most dangerous type of planet in the galaxy?" "We thought it would be educational," Professor Nix said defensively. "The variety of challenges would test every aspect of survival skills. No one was ever supposed to actually complete the full 72 hours. It was designed to see how long different species could last before requiring rescue." Dr. Hayes looked around the room at the assembled alien teachers. They were all staring at Jake's screen with expressions that she was learning to recognize as fear, awe, and confusion. "Jake isn't even particularly outdoorsy by human standards," she said. "He's just a college student who went camping a few times as a kid. There are millions of humans who could do what he's doing and many who could do it much better." The implication of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If an average human could casually survive in conditions that defeated the most prepared students from across the galaxy, what did that say about human capabilities in general? On the screen, Jake was now building an improved fishing trap. He worked with calm efficiency, humming a song from Earth while he wove sticks together. Every few minutes he would pause to appreciate the scenery or watch a bird flying overhead. He looked like someone enjoying a relaxing vacation, not someone fighting for survival in one of the most hostile environments the galaxy could create. "We need to contact the Galactic Education Council immediately," Professor Valdris said. "If our assumptions about human limitations are this incorrect, we may need to completely reconsider their role in galactic society." "There's something else," Professor Thek said quietly. "The simulation Jake is in right now, it's actually a simplified version of Earth's environment. We removed most of the dangerous elements because we thought the full simulation would be impossible for any species to survive." Dr. Hayes felt a chill run down her spine. "What did you remove?" "Large predators, poisonous insects, disease-carrying parasites, extreme weather events, dangerous geological activity, and about 60% of the toxic plant species," Professor Thek listed. "We kept only the basic environmental challenges." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what this meant. The test that was breaking records for difficulty was actually an easier version of the world that Jake called home. Every day of his life on Earth, he had faced conditions more challenging than what was defeating the galaxy's best survival students. Jake Morrison wasn't just surviving the ultimate test. He was making it look easy, and he didn't even know that what he was doing should have been impossible. On the final day of the test, Professor Valdris made a decision that would change everything. He had spent the night reviewing galactic records and consulting with the Academy's board of directors. Now, as Jake entered his 60th hour in the simulation, the professor decided to increase the difficulty settings. "We need to find his breaking point," Professor Valdris announced to the crowded observation room. "If humans are truly this capable, we must understand their limits before we can properly integrate them into galactic society." Dr. Hayes felt uncomfortable with the idea, but she understood the reasoning. The galactic community needed to know what humans could and couldn't handle. Still, she worried about Jake's safety as Professor Valdris began adjusting the simulation parameters. I'm introducing predator encounters, resource scarcity, injury scenarios, and psychological stress factors, the professor explained. These are challenges that would test even our most elite survival specialists. On the screen, Jake was sitting by his morning fire, roasting some roots he had found the day before. He looked completely relaxed and content. His clothes were dirty but intact. His shelter had weathered a light rainstorm during the night, and he seemed to be treating the whole experience like a pleasant camping trip. The first change came when Jake heard a low growling sound from the forest around his camp. He looked up from his breakfast and listened carefully. 3 simulated wolves emerged from the trees, their yellow eyes fixed on him. These were not earth wolves, but larger and more aggressive predators designed to challenge species with advanced defensive capabilities. Jake slowly stood up and picked up a burning branch from his fire. He made himself look as large as possible by raising his arms and stepping forward toward the wolves. "Get back," he shouted in a firm, loud voice. "Go on, get out of here." In the observation room, alien teachers watched in stunned silence. Most species would have either run in panic or tried to hide from such predators. The idea of confronting them directly seemed like madness. But the wolves backed away from Jake's display. They were programmed to respond to confident behavior, and Jake's calm aggression confused them. He continued advancing with his torch, making noise and taking up space until the predators decided to look for easier prey elsewhere. "Impossible," whispered Professor Nix. "Those predators are designed to be dominant over any humanoid species. How did he make them retreat without any weapons or protective gear?" Dr. Hayes watched Jake return to his breakfast as if nothing had happened. "Humans evolved alongside predators for millions of years," she explained. "We learned how to use psychology and intimidation because we couldn't always outrun or outfight dangerous animals." Professor Valdris increased the challenges. He reduced the number of fish in the stream and made many of the edible plants harder to find. Most species would begin showing signs of nutritional stress within hours. Jake noticed that his usual fishing spot wasn't producing as much food, so he simply moved to a different area. When he couldn't find enough fish, he set up multiple traps and began foraging more systematically. He found grubs under rotting logs, caught frogs near the water, and identified several types of roots and nuts that could supplement his diet. "He's eating insects," Professor Theck said with disgust, "and amphibians. The nutritional database shows those as emergency food sources that most species can only consume for short periods without getting sick. Humans are omnivores," Dr. Hayes replied. "We can eat almost anything organic if we have to. Our digestive systems are designed to handle a wide variety of food sources." Next, Professor Valdris introduced an injury scenario. While Jake was climbing a steep bank near the stream, a rock gave way under his foot. He slipped and scraped his arm badly on a sharp stone. Blood ran down from his elbow to his wrist. Jake examined the wound calmly. It was deep enough to be painful, but not serious enough to be dangerous. He cleaned it thoroughly with stream water, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and then bandaged it with strips of cloth torn from his shirt. Within minutes, he had returned to his normal activities. The alien teachers stared at the medical readouts in amazement. Jake's blood was clotting faster than should have been possible. His pain tolerance was far beyond what most species could handle. His body was already beginning the healing process, working to repair the damage automatically. "His cellular regeneration rate is extraordinary," Professor Theck said, studying the biological monitors. "Most species would require medical attention for a wound that size. He's treating it like a minor inconvenience." "Humans heal quickly compared to most species," Dr. Hayes explained. "We had to, because our world is full of things that can hurt us. Our bodies are designed to recover from injuries and keep functioning." Professor Valdris decided to try psychological pressure. He had the simulation create signs that suggested other dangerous predators were in the area. Strange sounds echoed through the forest at night. Trees were marked as if large claws had scraped them. The overall atmosphere became tense and threatening. Jake noticed the changes but didn't panic. Instead, he made his shelter more secure and built up his fire to provide better light and protection. He slept in short periods, staying alert for danger. When strange noises woke him, he would listen carefully and then make his own noise to let any predators know he was awake and ready. "He's not showing any signs of psychological breakdown," Professor Valdris said with bewilderment. "The stress levels we're creating should be causing fear responses, sleep deprivation, and decision-making problems. Instead, he seems to be adapting his behavior rationally. Humans are persistence hunters," Dr. Hayes said. "We evolved to handle long periods of stress and uncertainty. Our minds are designed to stay calm and focused even when we're in danger for extended periods." As the day continued, Jake faced every challenge the simulation could create. When food became scarce, he found alternatives. When predators threatened him, he drove them away. When he was injured, he treated himself and continued functioning. When the environment became psychologically stressful, he adapted his behavior and kept going. By evening, Jake had not only survived every test, but had actually improved his situation. His shelter was stronger than before. He had discovered new food sources. He had established safe routes through his territory. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had spent a productive day working on a challenging but enjoyable project. In the observation room, representatives from across the galactic community had gathered to watch. Military commanders, exploration leaders, scientific researchers, and government officials from dozens of different species stood in shocked silence as they watched Jake prepare for his final night in the simulation. "We need to completely reconsider our understanding of human capabilities," said General Crix, a senior Dreknari military officer. "If this is what an average human can do, their species may be the most naturally capable survivors in the galaxy. The implications for exploration and colonization are staggering," added Dr. Vex, a crystalline research director. "Humans could potentially survive on worlds that we consider completely uninhabitable." Professor Valdris looked around the room at the assembled alien leaders. "I think we must face an uncomfortable truth," he said. "We have been treating humans as a junior species that needs guidance and protection. In reality, they may be the most environmentally robust species ever encountered." On the screen, Jake was banking his fire for the night and settling into his improved shelter. He had not only survived the ultimate survival test, but had made it look routine. As he closed his eyes to sleep, completely unaware of the revolution his performance was causing in the observation room above, the test designed to find the limits of galactic survival capability had instead revealed that humans might not have limits at all. The simulation chamber opened with a soft hiss, and Jake Morrison stepped out into the bright lights of the Academy's testing facility. He blinked a few times as his eyes adjusted, then stretched his arms above his head. He felt tired but good, like after a long but enjoyable camping trip. "How do you feel?" asked the technician who helped him remove the monitoring equipment. "Pretty good," Jake replied honestly. "A little tired, but it was actually kind of fun. The fishing was great, and I managed to build a decent shelter. Kind of reminded me of camping in Colorado, except there weren't any mosquitoes." The technician, whose green skin had turned slightly pale, just nodded and made notes on his electronic tablet. Jake noticed that the alien seemed nervous about something, but he didn't think much of it. "Am I the first one finished?" Jake asked as he gathered his regular clothes. "You are the only one who completed the full 72 hours, the technician replied carefully. Jake felt a moment of worry. "Are the others okay? Did something go wrong with their tests?" "Everyone is fine," the technician assured him quickly. "They were removed from their simulations for safety reasons. This is normal for this particular test." As Jake walked back toward his dormitory, he passed several of his classmates in the hallway. Zeph 4 was moving slowly, his crystal body still showing stress fractures from his brief time in the simulation. Mira was wearing a breathing mask to help her recover from oxygen exposure. Even Corvin looked worn out with dark circles under his eyes. "Jake," Mira called out when she saw him. "How did your test go?" "It went pretty well," Jake said, not wanting to sound like he was bragging. "How about yours?" "Terrible," Zeph 4 admitted, his voice sounding like breaking glass. I lasted 6 hours before my body started cracking from the humidity. It was the most hostile environment I've ever experienced. Really? Jake asked, surprised. Mine seemed pretty normal. What kind of world did you get? Forest planet with extreme atmospheric conditions, Corvin said grimly. High oxygen, variable temperature, aggressive wildlife. I managed 8 hours before the microbial exposure overwhelmed my immune system. Jake realized that they had all been in the same type of simulation. The comfortable forest environment that had seemed so familiar to him had been a nightmare for his alien classmates. He felt bad for them but didn't understand why they had struggled so much with what seemed like basic camping conditions. The next morning, Jake was called to Professor Valdris's office. He expected to receive his test results, but when he arrived, he found a room full of people he didn't recognize. There were military officers in unfamiliar uniforms, scientists with complex measuring devices, and official-looking beings taking notes on electronic tablets. "Please sit down, Jake," Professor Valdris said, gesturing to a chair in the center of the room. "We have some things we need to discuss with you." Jake sat down nervously. "Did I do something wrong on the test?" "Quite the opposite," Dr. Hayes said from across the room. "You did something that no one thought was possible." Professor Valdris activated a holographic display that showed Jake's test performance compared to thousands of other students who had taken the same test over the past 47 years. The graph made Jake's eyes widen. While most students had survival times measured in hours, his line extended far beyond anyone else's. "You completed a test that was designed to be impossible," Professor Valdris explained. "The simulation you experienced was created to challenge the absolute limits of survival capability. Before you, the longest anyone had ever lasted was 14 hours and 23 minutes. But it wasn't that hard," Jake said, confused. "I mean, it was challenging, but nothing I couldn't handle. My dad taught me basic camping skills when I was a kid." The room fell silent. A tall alien with blue fur stepped forward and introduced herself as Director Kess from the Galactic Exploration Council. "Jake, we need you to understand something important about your planet and your species." She activated another holographic display that showed Earth floating in space. Around it were technical readouts and classification markers that Jake didn't understand. "When your world first made contact with galactic civilization, our survey teams had difficulty classifying it," Director Kess continued. "Your planet has environmental conditions that most species in the galaxy consider impossible to survive." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Dr. Hayes moved to stand beside the hologram. "Jake, by galactic standards, Earth is classified as a Class X death world. It has stronger gravity than most planets, more oxygen than most species can handle, extreme weather systems, and biological diversity that overwhelms standard immune systems." Jake stared at the hologram of his home planet. "But Earth is just normal. People live there. Kids play outside. Families go camping and hiking all the time." "That's exactly the point," said General Crix, a Draknari military commander. "What your species considers normal recreation would be considered extreme survival training by our standards. The camping trip you describe as fun would be classified as military endurance testing for most of our soldiers." Professor Valdris manipulated the holographic display to show comparative data from other inhabited worlds. Jake saw that Earth ranked at the very top of almost every measurement of environmental difficulty. Temperature variations, atmospheric, pressure, gravitational force, biological complexity. In every category, Earth was in the extreme range. "The test you just completed was based on a simplified version of Earth's environment," Professor Valdris explained. "We removed most of the dangerous elements because we thought the full simulation would be impossible for any species to survive." Jake felt dizzy as the implications began to sink in. "So you're saying that humans are different?" "You're not just different," Director Kess said. "You may be the most naturally capable survivors in the known galaxy. Your species evolved under conditions so harsh that you've developed abilities that other civilizations can barely comprehend." A small alien with multiple arms stepped forward. "I am Commander Zek, from the Galactic Colonization Authority. Based on your test results, we believe humans could potentially survive and thrive on worlds that we've classified as uninhabitable. Planets that have been written off as too dangerous for settlement might be perfectly suitable for your species. Jake thought about his friends and family back on Earth. But we're just regular people. I'm not some kind of super soldier or anything. I'm just a college student who likes hiking. That's what makes this so remarkable, Dr. Hayes said with a smile. You achieved something impossible and you didn't even realize you were doing it. Every human has capabilities that exceed what most galactic species consider the theoretical limits of survival. Director Kess activated a communication device, and a holographic image of an important-looking alien appeared in the room. Jake Morrison, the alien said, I am Chancellor Vex of the Galactic Education Council. Your performance has prompted us to completely reconsider humanity's role in galactic civilization. What does that mean? Jake asked. It means that instead of treating humans as a protected junior species, we're going to start asking for your help, Chancellor Vex replied. We have exploration missions to dangerous worlds, colonization projects on challenging planets, and research expeditions to hostile environments. We've been struggling with these projects for decades because we lacked species capable of handling such conditions. Jake felt overwhelmed. You want humans to help with dangerous missions? We want to offer partnerships, the Chancellor clarified. Your species has abilities that could revolutionize galactic exploration and colonization. In return, we can offer technological advancement and access to resources throughout the galaxy. As Jake walked back to his dormitory later that day, his head was spinning with everything he had learned. He passed other students in the hallway, but now he saw them differently. They weren't just his classmates. They were beings who came from gentle worlds where survival was easy and life was comfortable. That evening, Jake called his family on Earth using the Academy's communication system. His younger sister Emma answered the call with her usual cheerful smile. Hey, Jake, how was your big test? She asked. It went okay, Jake said, not sure how to explain everything that had happened. I think I did pretty well. That's great. Was it hard? Jake looked around his room at the alien technology and thought about the galactic representatives who had spent the day discussing humanity's future role in interstellar civilization. Actually, Em, it was kind of like camping. You know, just basic outdoor stuff. Emma laughed. That sounds easy. I hope your next test is harder and more interesting. Jake smiled, thinking about the exploration missions and colonization projects that the galactic community wanted human help with. Yeah, Em. I think my next assignments are going to be a lot more interesting. After ending the call, Jake looked out his window at the stars surrounding the Academy station. Somewhere out there were worlds waiting to be explored, planets that had been considered too dangerous for galactic civilization to settle. Now those worlds were being discussed as potential homes for humans. The camping trip that had started as a simple classroom test had revealed that humans weren't just another species in the galactic community. They were the species that others would call when the impossible needed to be done,